An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Steph Therapy 911 with Stephanie Samuels. And today I welcome Dr. Beverly Anderson back. We had been on a few weeks back and had way too much to talk about and didn't get to cover some of the important stuff having to do with officers involved in critical incidents and their long-term emotional survival and what happens to them physiologically after they've been involved in critical incidents. And the other week I had Dr. John Violante on, and he talked about how there's like this presumption that if people are involved in, if officers are involved in traumatic events, that they, that everybody talks about how everybody gets PTSD, and that is absolutely not the case. And being able to discuss with our audience kind of an expertise that you have really that far supersedes just being obviously in DC, and so important for not only the officers, but their families to also understand what's going on. Because a lot of times officers themselves have no idea. They go home to family members who, of course, want to be incredibly supportive, but they also don't understand that, this is many layers of an onion. It's not just the emotional, but there actually is a chemical change that goes on. So I'm going to let you kind of take us through incidents, kind of your expertise of what you've seen over the years and why you feel in the research you've done on what's working. And clearly, it's working. You've got a hell of a reputation, and your officers, thank God, are pretty healthy. So let me turn it over to you.
Oh, right. I think perhaps looking over the years, and I've worked with not just Metropolitan Police, but through the research that I conducted, I worked with state police, city police, federal police, federal law enforcement officers. There is one theme, I think, that probably is the umbrella, basically for law enforcement, and that's isolation. Because you think about it, when you look at what the profession entails, we screen for resilient people to begin with, and I think we do a very good job. So you have police officers who come into this profession, and they are you have to have a servant's heart to do this.
But definitely.
And so you have the responsibility for people. When police officers are out on the street, nobody calls the police to invite them to a barbecue. Either people have no use for the police or they have to have the police. And so you're exposed to individuals who are under stress, they're under duress. And that has an atmosphere. And so police officers have to be hypervigilant. And that basically means that their limbic system has to be somewhat aroused, because you have to be aware of what's wrong in this picture. If when you go on a ride along with a police officer, he or she is going to point out events that are taking place that you don't even notice.
Absolutely.
So, and that the exposure to trauma, nobody calls because their life is going great. So that's the basis for being the police. The other fact is the unpredictability, the constant change and unpredictability. Police officers do not have a schedule. When they mark on and they're in the cruiser, who knows what's going to happen? So there's unpredictability. And so the kind of creative construct, especially the executive functioning, the restraint that police officers have to exhibit, restraint, and that's all in the executive functioning, all in the frontal lobes. When you think about it, executive functioning is decision making, doing the right thing when you really want to do the fun thing, planning, impulse control. When you observe police officers on the street and you listen, as I have, to sometimes the harassment, the provocateurs, the people who just want to cause trouble, it's amazing to me that they are able to exhibit that kind of restraint. And that is a tremendously strong executive functioning. But confronting people who are going to hurt you, having that stance of, you've heard the 21-foot rule. The closer people are to you on the street, the less safe you are.
So just for those, Beverly, who explain the 21-foot rule, because we have civilians that are watching that haven't been trained. So go ahead.
So the 21-foot rule is just it refers to the fact that, for instance, an individual who has a knife and who is going to assault a police officer, if he's any closer than 21 feet, reaction is not like action, right? So the reaction time, that person will be able to stab you. So there's this kind of, in general, this 21-foot rule. And police officers need to maintain some distance between themselves and individuals, because you really don't know who is dangerous. You don't know who is going to hurt you, assault you. You just don't know. That's the unpredictability of this profession. And you're the problem solver. And when I say the isolation of law enforcement, people don't understand the life of a law enforcement officer to include their families. When you think about it, the family does not know, for instance, that death has a sight and a sound and a smell and an atmosphere. Death is not like death on television. So the family doesn't really know that. And so it's very isolating, because officers don't sit down with their families and say, well, let me explain to you what happened today. They don't talk about it, because remember, police officers protect and serve. So protect and serve also means protect your own family. So the family doesn't know what it doesn't know. And the officer's not going to talk about it.
And part of what you're talking about is that encoding of that critical incident, that it has that sight, sound, smell, taste, or what have you. When 9/11 comes around, I can't tell you how many of the officers talk about what a beautiful day it was.
It was.
And how these beautiful days can trigger horrific memories and events.
And in the way that the brain is, and I wish I had some AV to help out. So we have to envision what the brain looks like. Is basically the survival brain, that's where muscle memory is. So right here in the brain stem, that's where images are. That's where muscle memory is. That's the survival brain, or the reptilian brain. Anybody who's listening and knows more about the brain than me, which will be a whole lot of people, please don't send me hate mail because I'm oversimplifying a very complex brain. But basically, the reptilian brain, or the survival brain, is the oldest brain, followed by, because we call it the triune brain, meaning it's three brains in one, but they're all connected. So when police officers remember, and when they experience an event, they can't use language. Language is right here in the frontal lobes. Remember, executive functioning, planning, decision-making, impulse control. We're not going to be doing a whole lot of this when we need to survive, right? So that's why, for instance, police officers need to train. Training takes place here, muscle memory, because in the aftermath, it takes you longer to talk about that critical incident than it took for the critical incident to happen. But what we know about trauma is that trauma is engrafted in the brain with more vividness and more clarity than the happiest days of our lives. And why is that? It's because survival, if you don't survive, don't worry about anything else. So survival is number one, but it's in images. And when police officers say 9/11, it was such a beautiful day, it was a beautiful day. And then the trauma that ensued is engrafted in their minds, and it's engrafted as images. It's not engrafted as words,
Right.
as images, like any traumatic event. It's images. So in the immediate aftermath, say, of a shooting or even a baby death or a grotesque accident, it's what the officer does. First of all, it's shocking because it happens so quickly. And then they start, it's like a video, play, stop, rewind. So it's images, and those images are all engrafted in that survival brain, in muscle memory, you see? And the importance of debriefing, talking, the talking cure, is that that event that is engrafted as images, the frontal lobes, the language part, the meaning-making part of the brain, I have to understand what happened. And so for the survival brain that doesn't use language, we have to find a way to take those images and reduce them to words, to language, so that you weave that event into the tapestry of your life, into the tapestry of what I call your practice wisdom. You have to weave it. You have to use language because you have to understand it on not just a cellular level, but also on an intellectual level. Because if you don't, it just stays there like undigested food. And if you have undigested food, it's either going to come out that way or the other way.
Or, well, it sits there, it's just going to give you indigestion.
That's right. It's not good.
Right.
And that's why we do debriefing. And at MPD, we have 6 mandatory critical incident debriefings. Why do we do that? Why did we do that? Because if you ask a police officer if he's okay, he'll say, I'm fine. And we know what fine means. It's not fine. So that's why we do that. And it's so important because if you weave it into your practice wisdom, it's not stuck. You can move on. Sometimes I say it's a gift and a curse. We know why it's a curse. It's a gift because you move through it, and it informs you as you move forward. Because not everyone can be the police. And for those people who can, what a gift to the rest of us. Because I don't know a lot of people who could be the police, to include me.
And me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that, and that's the difficulty that's a parallel universe, living the world of a police officer.
So those 6 sessions, Beverly. So the critical incident happens Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Take me through when the initial, what it looks like and how those 6 sessions are done and how long, if there is a specific time or average that an average session is with you for that.
Well, the beauty part about the way that we work, there is a police and fire clinic and there are psychologists there. They work for the police department. They do fitness for duty evaluations. So that's separate, which is really good. We need to make certain that our police officers and our firefighters are fit for duty. So what happens is, as soon as the event happens, we are texted, we get a text from the communications, and we immediately go to the scene. We'll go to the scene if it's a shooting. If it's not a shooting, if it's something else, we will either go to the district or we'll have the officers brought right to our office. We respond immediately. That's really important.
Day or night?
Day, night, 24/7, doesn't matter. And I mean, DC is relatively a small city in comparison to Chicago, Philly, and Boston. So we can be anywhere, depending on what time of day it is. We can be anywhere within 15 minutes. And we've been around now, we're in our 33rd year. So we're pretty acculturated, so to speak. We're institutionalized. The officers expect it.
You are a welcome sight. You are known not to be a punitive agency or part of the agency, so that if they talk to you, this is a standard operating procedure so that they don't have to worry, oh shit, if I talk to Dr. Anderson or this one or that one, they're going to report back, I can lose my job.
Right. No, because we actually don't work for the police department. It's a union negotiated benefit. But when we get to the scene, the first thing that I say is our only role is to take care of the officers. That's the only thing that we do. So when we get to the scene, what I say is, hi, I'm not here for you to tell me what happened. I'm just here to take care of you. Is there anything that you need? Do you need some water? Do you need to call anybody? That's all I'm there for. And what we're there for is, in those moments after this event, whatever it was that exploded out of nowhere, that critical incident, whether it was a shooting or what have you, in the aftermath, you want to bring some semblance of peace, order, out of chaos. So what happened was just chaotic. And so now let's get you to a point to where the stress hormones are not coursing as much through your body. The adrenaline is not pumping. You're not out of breath. Your pancreas is not secreting more insulin than you need at the moment. All of that. I mean, because there's such a massive physical change when an officer has a confrontation with what I call the death threat, when there's a threat to an officer's life. That's everything is muscle memory then. And it's all based on training. And so in the aftermath of the chaos, you have to bring order so that the person can begin to calm down and begin to have a sense of what happened, to use language to describe the video that he or she sees in his head. Because there's, as much as you, as police officers train, there's no training that prepares you for the exact incident that's going to happen. And there'll never be another incident that happens exactly like that again. So it's a good thing that we have this thing called stimulus generalization, that human beings can learn from similar events. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be exact, but it needs to be similar. So human beings learn that. So to bring order from chaos, to basically talk about, we're going to have 5 more meetings, and they're not necessarily going to remember any of that because they're in such a state of hyperarousal. And so we just want to come in and introduce the opposite of chaos and hyperarousal, and that is a soft tone. How many children do you have? Where do you live? And, and to just be able to have the officer feel safe and more comfortable, and to prepare for what's going to come after that.
Fair to say to try and normalize the abnormal?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I talk about, and we have a brochure, I talk about the fact that What's not normal is what just happened. What is normal is that you're going to have thoughts about it. And I say, you're going to have thoughts about it, re-experience it. You may have flashbacks. You may not have any of these things happen. When you go home, you may not be able to sleep. You may feel numb. You may feel agitated. You may not have as much patience as you normally do. You may be very jumpy. You may not want to go to the 7-Eleven because you don't want anybody behind you. And that's all normal. You may think it's paranoia, but it's all normal. And we call it an acute stress reaction. It's going to last for about 30 days, not as intense as it is right now, but gradually, as you talk about it and weave it into the tapestry of your life, it becomes your new normal. This is now your new frame of reference. Does that make sense?
Yep. So that's out there. That's fresh. That's within inside the first, hopefully, hour or two. Kind of that, where they talk about the golden window.
What's interesting is while communications is responsible for notifying us, we get called immediately afterwards by the officers on the scene.
It's awesome.
So, oh yeah. I mean, in the last 3 incidents, I was there pretty quickly because the officers on the scene just called us up, and all of my officers have my cell phone number, and that cell phone is never off, and they know it. So, and they call. I tell them I'm giving it to you to use it.
So when you get there, do they give you your space, just you and the officer? Is that okay?
Yes. And we have the buy-in. I mean, what's so unique about our program is that we have the buy-in of the police department, the police chief, the officials. I mean, I trained them all when they came into the academy. We see them we train any officer who is promoted. We train them as to how to identify and assist officers who have experienced critical incidents. So we're so embedded into the culture of the police department, and we have such support from the officials and from the chief of police because it works. And it works because we work. And every incident every incident that happens, we're going to respond, and we're going to respond quickly. And they've come to trust that. After 32 years, they've come to trust it.
So now we're after the initial, the scene is cleared. Your officer now goes to whatever location. Now, will they go to a hospital to be checked out?
Only if they're hurt.
Okay. So no psychological, what have you. Let me ask about one of the things that in New Jersey I will address is that they will immediately send lawyers to give a statement.
We have that, yes.
So there is concern that if they're sending a lawyer and they want a statement immediately, because you've got your department, the attorneys for the unions, but the statement that they're going to give immediately after a critical incident might not be the best time to, while all this is going on, to give that statement. What are your thoughts? Because what they typically do, kind of an SOP, is take them to a hospital. They will make sure, blood pressure issues, just kind of check them out that way, and then give them something so that they cannot be questioned that night.
My thought about it is it's different for different people. It's different for different officers. If you have an officer who's only been on only been on the street for 6 months, his reaction may be very different from an officer who's been on the street for 5 years. But what is standard for our officers is that we come onto the scene and we sit in the car with the officer and just talk, waiting for the attorney. The attorney who comes in listens to the events as the officer tells them. And sometimes the attorney says, well, why don't you wait? Do you feel like giving a statement? They're not forced to give a statement that night. And I think it's different for different officers. And you want to be able to consolidate that memory, because keep in mind, you've got all of these stress hormones. Your frontal lobes are not necessarily working. You're not good. That would not be the best time to give an eloquent speech, because that's not the time. But that said, there are officers who feel like they want to tell it. They still can't believe what happened. And what they're doing is, in their mind, they're playing that video over and over again. And that's, I would say, I won't say 100%, 99.99% of the maybe 1,200 officers that I've sat in a car with who have had a critical incident, that's what they report. Yes, I'm seeing it in my mind, and that's normal. So, but remember, there's hyperarousal going on, because there's three reactions: the re-experiencing, that I can't believe that this just happened, or what the hell just happened? Did I really see that? Did he really do that? Did he really have a gun? I know I saw a gun. So that's the re-experiencing. And then the avoidance and numbing. It's like, it's overwhelming. Then I need to numb out, because it's not, for critical incidents, it's not business as usual. And business as usual for law enforcement officers is, you can't get emotionally connected to every call that you have on a shift. You have to suck it up and drive on. But there are some events that take place where suck it up and drive on, that's not going to cut it. If your partner is shot, you're not going to suck it up and drive on. If a child is shot or caught in the crossfires of a shooting, you're not going to suck it up and drive on. They don't. They hold it. Right? So then the third reaction is the officer's hyperaroused. Hyperarousal is your every stress chemical in your body is in full swing. I mean, you are basically, the alarms have gone out. All of the energy that you have stored in your fat cells and in your liver, you got to empty out the bank and get that to the rest of the body, because there is a threat. And the reticular activating system in the brain is saying, this is do or die. You've got to do it. So in milliseconds, you have adrenaline and epinephrine and norepinephrine and cortisol. This is the activation of the stress response, which is completely normal, by the way, because we activate the stress response to deal with a threat. Now, I say that for police officers, activation of the stress response is natural and normal. What we do in civilized society, unfortunately, is we activate the stress response when we get angry at somebody, when we're in traffic and we're clenching the wheel. That's not a good way to activate the stress response. It's a do or die moment. And so that's completely normal. And so we normalize the officer and the officer's reactions. And so that hyperarousal is basically, it takes at least 48 hours to reabsorb all those stress chemicals. Your heart is racing, the pancreas is doing its job, the pupils in the eyes dilate, your muscles contract, blood is brought into the vital organs, so that your heart, your liver, your kidney, your spleen, your lungs is all activated. That is a big event. So it takes at least 48 hours to kind of calm down. So it's a big event, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot out of an officer. But once again, we hire resilient people.
So I want to kind of talk about that, about all the blood going to the vital organs, because one of the things that after an officer is shot, if they survive the initial, wound, the immediacy,
Right.
that statistically speaking, they will live. But part of it is that the body chemistry, because it protects those organs.
That's right.
That you almost don't want to relax them because they can bleed out. But otherwise, they have the ability to survive those wounds because of that stress response that the body goes through.
Exactly right. Yes.
So that's it's one of the things that kind of, the body's an amazing thing because it really does arm us for survival. It does everything against sometimes our own desire.
Oh, absolutely.
To live.
I mean, it's incredible. And think about it. It's when you activate that stress response, your immune system is bolstered up. Clotting time decreases because your body is anticipating, your autonomic nervous system is anticipating a wound. Okay, that's a confrontation with a death threat. Sometimes something called auditory exclusion happens. When your pupils dilate, and auditory exclusion is where you're not hearing anything because you are absolutely zoned into the threat. So you have that, some officers report tunnel vision, because this is a do or die moment. You have to be focused in on where the threat is. I mean, it's incredible. The immune system is activated so that if you do get a wound, it's not going to be infected. I'll tell you what is not activated. Growth is not activated. Reproduction is not activated. Your GI system is shut down because that is a very big project. You use about 20% of the body's energy just digesting food, which is why when an officer is involved in a critical incident and he has that whole fight or flight response going, if he's had anything to eat, he's going to have indigestion later on because everything stops. And beginning with the mouth, because right after the event, he has dry mouth. Why does he have dry mouth? The salivary glands dry up. I can tell you one thing. There's not one sex hormone coursing through his body or her body at that moment because this is not a time for reproduction, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an amazing event that takes place in the human body.
If more academies could explain truly what goes on, it would be so helpful. But the other part of it that I'm going to go back to, particularly now looking at our society, which I think we'd be remiss if we didn't, with that giving a statement, is that everything now is being micromanaged so tremendously. I mean, it was always being reviewed and reviewed, but now it is being reviewed. They are guilty until proven innocent. They will be tried in the papers long before it will ever go to a court, if it goes to a court, even if there's nothing having to do with a court or a grand jury. And it was a clean incident, no matter what the incident is. That my concern now more than ever is actually them giving a damn statement while they're in this state of hyperarousal and making sure, your men and women are in a beautiful position. They have Mother Beverly that's not going to let anything happen to them, that understands the physiological reactivity, that, statements would not necessarily be given. But we have a very large country with much misunderstanding of the physiological effects and not understanding the psychological effects.
Not really understanding anything about, for instance, a shooting. For instance, we hear, well, why couldn't the police have shot the gun out of his hand? Why couldn't they have shot him in the foot to incapacitate them? That is a complete, it's not a misunderstanding, it's a complete lack of knowledge, for one. And for the other thing, I'm not, how can I say this in a politically correct way? The media is not always our friend. Let's not let a great story be interrupted by getting the truth out. Let's just do sensationalism. Let's interview people who weren't even there. And I don't think that the press really does us a service by not reporting the facts, by holding off until the investigation is complete. There's this paranoia that police departments are not going to be transparent. We have a very transparent police department. And
Most departments at this point are transparent, except there is a slight problem with the fact that we have laws and that the only ones that have to abide by them
right,
are the officers and the departments. So there's
have guns. They didn't get the memo that it's illegal to have guns. They didn't get that memo. I don't know. It's insanity to me.
Yep. No, it is. And there's silence. Look at, you've got the micro and the macro. So in our lives at home, silence, in relationships is so grossly misunderstood. Mm-hmm. And people fill in their, what they believe that your silence is. So now we go to the macro world, and now you have the officer who's not speaking out, and departments that aren't giving press conferences because they do not understand is that they cannot try the case and talk about the incident in the public. That's what, and then people get so angry that if Ferguson happens, it's going to be a George Floyd that's going to happen, because once those facts are laid out, there's no choice if you're going to have any type of law and order that is going to be shown that there is just blatant disregard for human life, and that the person was targeted for some reason other than they had done something that caused the reaction.
And I think our leaders do police officers and do society a disservice by making statements like, well, they should charge him, without ever seeing any of the facts of the case. I mean, it has to be investigated, and they do investigate them. And they have robust procedures that they go through.
And they see the facts on somebody's cell phone. And that becomes the facts. Well, most people don't walk around with a cell phone on. Typically, if something goes down, then they turn on the cell phone. Well, you've missed everything prior to that. Right. But that's a much higher pay grade. But it trickles down into your world and into my world. As you and I were talking off camera for a little bit, the officers that have taken off the badge and have said, not for me, good officers, people that just don't want to do this, that were such an asset, that's who we end up losing. And it's, my own frustration, and before I came on and today went out for a nice long walk, I just, I thought to myself, do I walk away? Do I just say, you know what, it's enough? Like my disappointment in society. And then, you kind of taper and you say, okay, got all these different layers on like you do. Is, if I walk away, what's that like? What's it like to say, the founder of Copline has just decided to, shut down. But it becomes very, very difficult to balance out one's anger, one's disappointment, one's true disgust, and then still be able to take care of truly those that ask nothing of us. That the thought of betraying them supersedes the thought of just saying it's enough.
Right. It's like this. Police officers, I believe, in my experience, I can only speak to my experience, they do take this profession to protect and serve. In my little world, this has been what I do, is to take police officers. I take police officers, I work with them, I take care of them. And to include educating them. Somebody cares for them, and that's my role. Whether society supports them or doesn't support them, I support them. And so that's my role. I can't control society, but I can control training officers, taking care of them, educating them as to what's happening to their bodies. So, the outer society, I can't control that, but I've been doing this for 35 years now, and we've had our good times and our bad times. And I just have control over my little world. And so that's going to stay the same. And I don't lose enthusiasm at all, because the people that I work with are the real American heroes. We talked about that.
Yeah.
Not the basketball players, it's
Right.
not the football players, it's not the actresses and the actors. It's the people who actually go out there into the streets and take care of the victims and the children and the people who cannot take care of themselves. And sometimes that means that there's going to be, there's going to be violence. And, if we're not for the police, I've been the victim of crime in Washington, D.C. And who was always there was the police in no time. And not because they necessarily knew who I was. They just got a call and they were there, as they always are.
Yeah. No, it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible to watch and to be able to impact in some way, in a positive way. I mean, that's what keeps me going.
Right.
And it is an amazing career.
Yes.
But there are just times that I can just feel that heaviness that they feel, that you're like, you kidding me? So,
And they ask for so little. And not necessarily because anything was happening, but when they were out there on the lines, to just go out and say, how are you doing? We appreciate you. We appreciate you. And they just, they just like it. They light up. But hey, in 10 years, if I retire, I'm going to do it for free. I do donate some of my time. So, I mean, it's a wonderful thing. They are wonderful, wonderful people to work with. I love working with strong, resilient people who better than our public servants. And they do have a servant's heart. How else can you do this? How else can you do this?
So true. So true. Beverly, what is your thoughts on EMDR?
I think it's a very interesting technique that works for some officers, works for some people. I don't think it's a theory of personality. I think it's a technique like we have many different techniques. Relaxation, meditation, that's a technique. But I have known police officers who have participated in EMDR for whom the images are not so haunting. And that's, so I would say if it works, then use it. And I've known people for whom it has worked. You sort of have a bag of tricks, your tools, your toolbox, and do what, there are therapists who really like it, who believe in it, and who are really good at it. So, I say if it's helpful, do whatever is helpful.
Are you an EMDR person? No.
Hell no.
Okay.
No, it's more structured than I'm not. I sort of am. I read the energy in the room. It's a different kind of therapy. It's,
When I had when I was up in McLean, that was one of the questions that I said to them, because they really have got some truly amazing people up there. And I said, why isn't EMDR being used? And they said, we have not found it to statistically be of any relevance when it comes to being able to deal with PTSD and trauma. They said, but the eye movement isn't part of it, but the desensitization part, which made sense to me because many times I take my officers back to the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the DR part.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm. That's weaving it into the tapestry of their lives.
Right. And much like you read the room or what have you, and being able to try and figure out, if they're stuck, where are they stuck? Why are they stuck?
Mm-hmm.
When have they felt like this before? Kind of what you talked about. We've hired a resilient population. And what we know is how resilience is acquired.
Right.
So what is it from their past that they experienced that's similar that they can pull from?
Right.
Once again, to kind of get them through this.
And see, that's the thing for traumatic events. What is the event? How close physically were they to this event?
Right.
How close psychologically were they?
Right.
How much warning did they get? What was the end result? So there are certain factors within traumatic events that makes them more serious, impact the officer more. So it really, and there's no two events that are alike. So it depends on all of that as well. But the important thing is, I think anyway, if it's happened to you, then it's part of your history. And so it's important to use language to talk about it because you don't want to be phobic for the event. And when I first started out, police officers just, okay, suck it up, drive on, don't talk about it. And it's not good. It's important if you're going to get the learning value of it to actually be able to consolidate that memory. You have to use language to go through it. And,
I love that. I love that we're touching on this because that's not something that I have necessarily addressed or though understand it. Truly that importance. We're dealing with a population that aren't the best communicators to begin with. Mm-hmm. And now we're tasking them with talking about how these events feel, not just the words associated with it, but being able to connect the brain and the physiological pieces that are going on and the emotional pieces that go along with that. And then quite possibly the resilient piece, which says, when in your lifetime, when did you feel like this? And they might never have discussed that they used to watch a parent being beaten. Mm-hmm. And that then kind of brings up, so that importance of having those sessions, 6 sessions is a beautiful amount of sessions, being able to really wring this thing out rather than, and I'm sure, I'll get shit for this, but, the typical debriefing model, always ends, and I'm not saying that it's wrong or what have you, but, a gazillion people are trained in the Mitchell model or what have you. And at the end, it's kind of this kumbaya, what did you get out of this? Kind of, we end on a happy place. I don't necessarily think that, that group debriefings have been that helpful. I've always found that certain players are very guarded with sharing information.
It's interesting how you do. If we have more than one officer involved in an event, the first thing that we do is get them all together. So when we do briefings, it's not several different people with several different events. We get those officers together as soon as possible after the event because what we know about trauma is that there are always distortions in memory. And we know that there are always distortions in memory because you don't have the same people with the same experience, with the same anything, right? They're not even physically in the same place. So in the absence of having the whole story, we have a tendency to fill in the blanks, as you just referred to a few moments ago.
Right.
So what we do, and Jeffrey Mitchell did a wonderful job. He worked more with firefighters who work as groups.
Right.
And so the Mitchell model is one model. And I know that there are people who don't think it's a good idea. You know what? I think whatever works, that's what you should do. Our model is not so much that. I'm a little bit more organic. What I like to do is start from the concrete.
Mhm.
You know, tell me what happened. What
Right.
did you almost not go to work that day? Did you almost call in sick that day because you just weren't feeling it? Tell me how your day started. And so we start from the concrete, and then tell me what happened.
Right.
Not the Reader's Digest version, from moment to moment. What did you think? What were your thoughts? What did you see? When did you come to that conclusion? And when the officers come into the office, before we start, I say, because I'm a risk taker, I say, I will bet you anything that you will walk out of here today knowing at least one thing that you didn't know when you came in. Because what happens is they are all able to fill in the blanks because they're in a different place.
Right.
They see different things. So we do start with the concrete, then we talk about what happened, how it unfolded, what your thoughts were, how did you feel, what did you say, who responded to the scene, what were your thoughts? When I came into the car, what did you say? What is this woman talking to me so much for? And sometimes we laugh because what I'm trying to do is normalize the moment, bring you down.
So the group event, I think, is very beneficial when you've had more than one
Right.
player with the similar experience. But I do find after that, so don't forget in the Mitchell model, there's no follow-up.
Right. Well, that's not just what we do.
So correct. So where I think that model has been remiss, and I'm going to go for more macro on this. When we look at officers that die by suicide, one of the factors seems to be officers involved in traumatic events. So if we can do the group debriefing, but the key to me has always been that follow-up, because without it,
they have to have something. They have to have something that is a foundation for them. That is a secure base. All right. Let's use the word secure base. The secure base starts when I get in the car and say, "Hey, you need some water." All right. They've already had me in the academy. They already know me.
Right.
They got their chocolate badges at the end of our first training session. So, so they already have that. And then the first thing I do is say, here's my cell phone number. I want your cell phone number. And I'm going to call you tomorrow just to check on you.
Yep.
And you don't have to pick up the phone. Oh, that's Dr. Anderson. I get a call. No. This is not about me. This is about you.
Right.
If you need something, call me.
Yep.
If there's something that's troubling you, call me. But I'm going to check in with you, and then we're going to set your appointment for next week.
So what I have found, so that when I debrief, so I'll typically debrief in a group if it was a group event.
Right.
And then I will do a follow-up individually. And then typically about 4 after that. And then I will do one 3 months later. And the reason for that 3-month piece is because of acute stress disorder potentially turning at that point to the post-traumatic, and being able to understand what's going on for that officer, what is still sticking for them.
Right.
And I think if departments could do the Dr. Anderson pieces, get them those sessions, and then that 3-month follow-up, that we can catch far more
Right.
than we're catching.
Right. I mean, in our case, what happens is with the 6 sessions, they're spread out, and we just have a beautiful situation where we have the police and fire clinic. They give sick time. They will say, okay, when can you come back? They'll say, well, when you finish your 6 sessions with Dr. Anderson and her team, then you'll go back to work. We have a very good relationship, and we have a command staff, and we have a chief, and we have a union who are all into one thing, and that is, and Chief Newsham said that to me. He said, our officers we need to take care of them. We need to take care of their emotional well-being. We need to take care of them. And that's what this is all about. So when you have all of the players,
Absolutely.
union, the police department, and the police officers believing that this is a safe place, and I have doctor-patient privilege,
Right.
then, it's, it works.
Absolutely. And the first fear of the officers is, if I don't go back to work, am I going to be paid? Huge concerns, which in your department is taken care of. That's kind of like, you just need to be able to get well or what have you. Truly an exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Beverly, if you don't mind me asking, what have been your suicide rates over the past couple of years, active?
In the past couple of years, we haven't had any.
So in what we are finding to be unprecedented times, with a incredibly high suicide rate, damn it, we really need to look at, because you guys are in, you're not in Mayberry. Your officers are not in Mayberry policing. You are in the nation's capital, being tasked all over with some of the most difficult, emotionally and physically charged events. And yet the system is working. And that is something that I think we need to be able to just continue to build on.
But there are 2 major points here. One is how we started out, and that is the isolation. The fact that police officers are so isolated, even from their families. I mean, when an officer comes home, and that's why education is so important for the officers. And we do this PDT education, and the officers say, boy, I wish my wife could see this, because they don't come home and use those words. I tell them, when you go home, here you are, this hypervigilant police officer, you don't just turn off the switch. I said, that's when you, instead of going down to play the video games, you go into your house and you do the opposite of what you do on the street. On the street, you keep a distance. When you go home, you have to turn that switch off. And if it's your kid who's there, if it's your significant other, close the distance.
Yeah.
Touch them, hug them, say hello.
That tactile component is so huge. I know sometimes in debriefings I work with military, that I have had them physically get out of the car because they're weaving, because they had been involved in IEDs, so they will not stay straight on a thing. Right. That I will have them literally pull over and feel the grass, because they tactilely have to realize, I'm in Oklahoma.
You're in your survival brain.
Yeah.
That's really what it is. So you got to get out of your survival brain, get the cop face off, and just in terms of how they communicate at home. It's on the street, they're the problem solvers. They are giving the solutions. Here's what you need to do. So when you come home, you don't necessarily have to do that. When your significant other tells you what happened at work, you don't have to tell her or him what they needed to do. Go on an emotional vacation, send your problem solving to Acapulco, and just listen. Yeah. That's all. That's all you got to do is listen. And that's really hard for officers, because they're in the position of having to solve everybody's problems. And it's so isolating. It's the isolation, and that's one big one, the isolation and the education. They need the education, but they also need a program where they can go and they can get what they need without being afraid that somebody is going to see or know or get the information.
Absolutely.
So it really can't be run by the police department.
Right. Well, yep. Totally agree. Totally agree. Is there anything that we haven't covered that with what's going on in the world, any advice that you'd want to give to officers, their families? We have a decent amount of families that are watching tonight, that you would want to say something that we haven't.
You know, there are some really good books. I Love a Cop is a great book that helps family members get educated about what police officers do. And I strongly recommend that spouses and significant others go on a ride along.
Oh,
it's a whole different world, you know? Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think understanding what it's like and what they go through.
Right. Because what we want to prevent, are we almost done?
No, go ahead.
Okay. What we want to prevent is, and I don't use the term post-traumatic stress disorder only because it really, if you look at the criteria, it really doesn't quite fit police as well as it could, especially because numbing out and compartmentalizing the natural human emotions, that's adaptive. That's what makes a good police officer, because you wouldn't last for 3 months if you didn't do that. So I choose to call it compartmentalization, not dissociation. But if police officers don't get the help that they need, they are going to be numbed out and irritable. They are going to be detached from their family because they're detached from people on the street. They're going to be cynical and pessimistic. They're going to feel isolated. They may lose empathy. They may suffer from vicarious trauma. And that's when that they have that chronic hyperarousal. And what do you do with that? And then let's not even get into the sleep problems and the fatigue. I mean, I can say, hey, Officer so-and-so, I worked 78 hours. 78 hours, that's nothing. I mean, they are walking sleep deprivation studies. So when you bring that all together and you have some of these self-soothing behaviors, especially as a counteraction against the hyperarousal is where you've always got stress hormones coursing through your body, and that's not good. And so what do you use to come down from that? So ultimately, that can result in what I call police trauma syndrome. They are symptoms, reactions that are, you can see them, you realize that they're there, and that's what begins to impact them in such a negative way that they're no longer the people that they used to be. That's where we need to get in. And we need to prevent that. Ultimately, if our program is successful, it will be a program of prevention. That's when you know that you have been successful.
Absolutely. And you have not only been a pioneer, like I said, 30 some odd years later, I will still grab so much of your information. It's just, you are unwavering. You're unwavering in continuing to make such a positive difference, and not just to the officers, to clinicians like myself. I mean, just your kindness and willingness to give everything you have to make sure that we have all of the tools that we need. Right? And truly, my success is truly shared with you. And I will always be grateful for that.
That's a symbol of success. When you have it, you have to give it away. If you don't give it away, it's not a good thing. But I'm a simple woman, a one-trick pony. I just do one thing, and I love what I do.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Beverly, for coming back on the show, for being part of the solution, and for always being willing to come on and talk about some of the stuff that our our listeners want to hear more about. So next week, I'm next Sunday on Steph Therapy 911 with Stephanie Samuels. I've got Sherry Martin, who heads up the National FOP Wellness. Yep. Health and wellness for the national FOP, which is going to be interesting to hear what they're doing as part of the solution as well. National FOP has really played a significant role in making sure that the issues that are going on in this country are being addressed. And it's wonderful to see, our largest union in the country really stepping up, and so that will be very exciting.
We're all in this together.
We are indeed. So thank you. And for those of you that are watching, I always appreciate any comments or thoughts that you have for me. A lot of you end up posting on Facebook, but also please feel free to write me at StephTherapy911@gmail.com. So always like to hear what I can do better, and what interests are out there so that we can meet everybody's needs in the community. So anyway, thank you. Thank you all. Please be safe and healthy. And we will see you next week live here. Sherry Martin and I are actually going to be pre-taping the shows. So please know that I will be watching along with you that day. And I will be fielding questions from you guys on Facebook Live next Sunday.